We are on an imminent path to war. I've been at this game for 40 odd years in the military and then commentating on it since then. And I have never seen a clear path to global conflict. And I can now. I can see several clear paths, which is worrying.
Thank you, Philip. So we've had European military leaders gathering at Northwood with the British Prime Minister really pushing this coalition of the willing. So I was wondering, could you explain what a coalition of the willing actually is?
A coalition of the willing is getting a group of people who are not necessarily part of any other formal grouping where there will be international agreements in place. So, for example, NATO. So whilst some of the people that were at Northwood for the meeting yesterday represent NATO countries, there were non-NATO countries represented as well. I understand that Australia was there, Japan was there. I suspect New Zealand was represented at it as well. So this is bringing together people who have said they want to participate in some way in the operation. Doesn't necessarily mean troops on the ground or airplanes in the air, but contribute in some way, and it's outside the framework of any other formal grouping that exists.
So what could some of these contributions look like?
Well, it could be anything. If we look at what's happening with the coalition of the willing in defence of the Red Sea at the moment, I think there's 12 or 13 or 14 countries in that. Some of them are providing staff officers in the planning headquarters. Some are providing staff officers in the operational headquarters. Some are providing ships, and it tends to be the UK and the US that are carrying out most of the attacks. But the French have contributed, the Germans have contributed in defeating against the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. And it's effectively something similar that you'll get when looking at what's going on inside Ukraine. So UK and France have said they will contribute troops. Some of the Scandinavian countries have said that they'll contribute troops on the ground. You need to build up the potential for some ground troops to go and do something there. You then need air forces that can come in and provide that a level of support. You need air defence capability that can put an air defence umbrella over the troops that are going to be on the ground. And you need logistic support. As well as that, you need people that can provide specialist staff officers who can help plan and sustain the operations in different areas. So each of the countries will be trying to get an understanding as to what the problem will be, what is it that you're asking us to solve, and then amongst themselves, and in particular with the UK seemingly leading this with France, UK and France trying to get an understanding of what different countries are politically willing to supply, where countries are not willing to supply certain things. So that's almost as important to answer. And then try and work out from that what the art of the possible is when it comes to any potential peace plan.
So there you mentioned France and Germany, and earlier on this month we've had Macron saying he'd be open to the debate of extending France's nuclear umbrella to Europe. And then you also have the rhetoric of whether the new German Chancellor would be willing to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine. I was wondering, how likely do you think how likely is it that this will happen? And also, is this an indicator of anything?
Well, it's an indicator of domestic politics coming into the international geopolitical arena. The UK nuclear deterrent is declared to NATO. Most European countries are members of NATO, and therefore, de facto, the UK nuclear deterrent under an Article 5 situation, and that's the only time that nuclear weapons would be used, is already declared to Europe. And therefore, Francois Macron is coming in and trying to position himself as a leader of the EU, take over from that position that Germany has traditionally held. And that's why he's going, I'll let you play with my nuclear weapons as well, and declare that in. The French tend to be very nationalistic in everything that they do from a defence perspective, whether it's procurement or deploying capability. The Germans, again, the new German Chancellor coming in, his predecessor refused to supply the Taurus missiles to Ukraine. One of the things that he was arguing about during his campaign was he was going to reverse that decision. Again, this is focused on domestic politics as much as anything. But again, positioning Germany as a military leader again in the future. Poland has taken over that position from a defence capability, but Germany, interestingly, recently has just voted to change its constitution to borrow more money and increase its debt, provided that money is spent purely on defence. So we're seeing a big ramping up of defence capability across Europe. It's being done on a national basis. It always is done on a national basis, and we are seeing that power play that's going on both internally, where people are focused on domestic politics, but also externally within the EU, and then externally within this wider coalition of the willing that we keep talking about.
So there you said about a ramping up of European kind of armed forces or defence. I was wondering then, how likely do you think it is that they can achieve a peace deal with Ukraine and Russia without a US backstop?
Well, it depends what the peace deal is, and it depends how that is going to be policed. I think we're still a long way off it, because the statements we're getting out of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin and Zelensky all seem to be different. The good thing is there's talks starting in Saudi Arabia this weekend. We'll see how those go, and that'll begin to refine things. So there will, in theoretical terms, if there's a peace agreement, there should be a force that goes in on the ground that can independently monitor what's going on and make sure that it's not the Ukrainians monitoring and the Russians monitoring, because they can accuse each other of ceasefire violations. So if you've got an independent force that's in there that can do that, and ideally that independent force is sufficiently strong that if it detects or it comes across a ceasefire violation, it has got a bigger stick than the person that's carrying out the ceasefire violation and can threaten to take military action against them to stop them from breaking the ceasefire. Whether European nations can do that in the short term, certainly with ground forces, is questionable. We then come into the overwatch from air forces, and within that we've got overwatch from missile capability. Europe, the UK has got some fantastic capabilities in the air, so air-dropped weapons, but also some fantastic capabilities with our long-range drones that we have that can carry weapons. They've been used against the fight against ISIS in Syria, and cruise missiles and other things that could be used. So there's so many different ways of providing a peace monitoring, peacekeeping, peace enforcing capability on the ground. This is where it's important the chiefs all get together and have this debate and try and work out the art of the possible against some theoretical ideas of what a peace plan would look like, and then they can refine those as the real detail starts to formulate over the coming days, weeks, or months, if it does.
There you just mentioned the art of the possible, and yesterday we had Robert Fox on Times Radio saying that we are in an imminent, if not actual, state of war. I was wondering, how much do you agree with this statement? And if so, what is possible? How can Europe prepare for it?
Everyone talks about war, and I know Robert well. War is a formal stance where it is declared between two states. So, and that brings in a lot of legalities around it. We haven't had a declaration of war, I don't think, since the end of the Second World War, where from a UK perspective. Yet we've been involved in a number of conflicts, the Falklands and Iraq and elsewhere. There wasn't actually a formal declaration of war, apart from the global war on terrorism. Actually, the only time Article 5 of NATO has ever been called by the United States, there was a declaration of war against Al Qaeda by the United States, and that resulted in the deployments to Afghanistan, which we have lost. So Robert is right in that we are on an imminent path to war. I've been at this game for 40 odd years in the military, and then commentating on it since then, and I have never seen a clear path to global conflict. And I can now. I can see several clear paths, which is worrying. There's also a debate going on about the amount of activity that's happening outside a formal declaration of war, but that is warlike activity. It's designed to disrupt, to cause damage, whether that be physical damage or political damage or psychological damage. That's going on in what we describe often as the grey zone. And it's below the threshold activity. So that could be information operations, trying to influence the way different elections are going. It could be cyber attacks. It could be speculative. As we're recording this, the main news channels are all talking about the fire at Heathrow Airport. It could be something physical like that. I'm not saying that was an attack by a nation state. It's more likely just an accident that's happened. But we have seen nation states, and in particular the Russians, you're putting explosive devices in DHL parcels that were being loaded onto aircraft in the UK and in Germany. We've seen warehouses burned down in London. We've seen the use of Novichok on the streets of the Sleepy Hollow of Salisbury in the UK. We've seen polonium-210 used on the streets of London. These are all warlike activities, but they're below that threshold where a nation state would declare war on another nation state.
And finally, Philip, up until now, Keir Starmer's been described as like a broker of peace. Until recently, he has warned Putin of severe consequences if he breaks a peace deal with Ukraine. Can we draw anything from this change of rhetoric?
Well, it's Keir Starmer again trying to position himself, and rightly so, because the United Kingdom is in a unique position here. We are one of the founding members of NATO. We provide the Deputy Supreme Commander to the American Supreme Commander of NATO. Therefore, we are a natural lead for a NATO-type operation that doesn't include the Americans, but can bring other coalition forces in, this coalition of the willing. We have planned these sorts of operations beforehand and helped execute them both in Bosnia, Kosovo, and elsewhere. We are a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, but we're also, and so is France, but we're also in a unique position in that we are part of the Five Eyes community. That gives us access to US intelligence. They've got access to our intelligence, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. But Five Eyes is really 2 + 3 eyes. It's that special relationship that we keep talking about between the UK and the US. It's an intelligence relationship at a working level, and that is something that Europe is very jealous of because it gives us insights to things that only the Americans have capability to look at it. We give the Americans insights into things that only we have the ability to look at as well. So it's a symbiotic relationship. But that's why, from a geopolitical perspective, the UK is in that unique position to try and take a lead in this. And this is where Keir Starmer is trying to step up and do that.